Hey guys, tonight we're headed to a town where democracy took a nap. A mule won an election, and no one really tried to stop him. You're standing on a dirt road so dry it crunches underfoot. The air smells faintly of barn dust and blackberry pie, and the loudest thing for miles is a lazy breeze pushing the squeaky sign of the local general store. This is the kind of town where news travels slower than soup cools, and where, one year, folks were so thoroughly unbothered by the concept of governance that they accidentally gave political power to a hoofed herbivore named Smudge. You probably won't survive this story, politically speaking. But then again, neither did the last guy who ran against the mule. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, post your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where, and when, you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into town at a gentle saunter. That's the only speed it accepts. There's no hurry here. The horses walk like philosophers. The cats blink like monks. Even the wind seems to ask your permission before it nudges your hat. The town doesn't have a name you'd recognize. Most people just called it the town or our place, or if you asked old George, the spot what has eggs and also nettles. But it had enough of a population to require a mayor, mostly to oversee the post office, prevent anyone from painting their fence with lead-based jokes, and officially declare when it was too hot to wear trousers. At some point in the late 1800s, historians still argue whether it was 1876 or 1879. Something happened. Or rather, nothing happened. The sitting mayor, a man named Otis Gribble, passed away mid-nap on the porch of the saloon, which was, incidentally, also the town hall. And someone needed to replace him. But no one particularly wanted to. Not because politics were dangerous or divisive here, quite the opposite. They were dreadfully dull. The biggest controversy that year had been over whether chickens could attend town meetings if they sat quietly. Verdict, yes, but only if supervised. So when the call for nominations went up on the post office board, it sat there for a while. A long while. And nothing. No one stepped forward. Until Jasper Tull, local stable hand, baker's cousin, and known prank enthusiast, made a suggestion. Why not Smudge? Everyone laughed. Smudge, after all, was a mule. Not metaphorically. Not as a slur for stubbornness. A little, four-hooved, hay-chomping, snore-emitting mule with exactly one ear that stood upright and one that flopped lazily like a tired flag. He belonged to Old Man Dowser, who insisted Smudge could count to 5 but had tragically poor handwriting. The mule's main accomplishments to date were pulling the apple cart on Tuesdays, blocking the path to the outhouse when the moon was full, and refusing, politely but firmly, to wear decorative ribbons. But the thing is, Smudge was dependable. And in a town that prized naps over ambition, that counted for something. So Jasper, with the help of his friend Eloise and one particularly wobbly ladder, wrote Smudge the Mule in big block letters across the nomination sheet. Under qualifications, he simply put, lifts morale. Also wagons. It was meant as a joke. You're supposed to laugh. You do. But the thing about jokes in small towns is that they sometimes snowball into reality before anyone remembers to stop them. By the end of the week, the other candidates were, let's say, underwhelming. One was the owner of a sourdough starter that was legally classified as a biohazard. Another had accidentally declared war on the next town over by misusing a semicolon in a letter about quilting. So when the ballots were handed out, meticulously handwritten and tucked into used cigar boxes, Smudge wasn't just an option. He was the only one that made people smile. And if there's one thing this town liked more than blackberry pie and slow Tuesdays, it was a good chuckle with its civics. On election day, people wandered into the saloon-turned-voting booth at whatever pace suited their shoes. Some brought their dogs. One man brought a duck. The duck was not registered. Each person took their ballot, sipped lemonade, because what's a ballot without refreshment, and marked their vote. Some with care. Some while giggling. A few may have used hoofprints. and when the last box was closed and everyone wandered back into the sun, they didn't expect much. Maybe a runoff. Maybe a revote. Maybe someone would finally say, "All right, joke's over, let's elect a human." But instead, the town clerk, a woman who usually filed her paperwork alphabetically by how dusty it is, read the tally. Smudge, 26 votes. Sourdough Man, 12. Semicolon mistake, 5. Spoiled ballots, including one with the doodle of a surprised carrot, 3. Smudge had 1. Of course, some folks raised an eyebrow. Or both. Or in the case of Miss Calloway, who had very expressive eyebrows, nearly launched them off her forehead. "Can a mule be mayor?" someone asked. "Didn't say he couldn't," someone else replied. The town charter, written in cursive so swoopy it resembled a plate of linguine, specified that the mayor must be a permanent resident of sound standing and consistent character. Smudge certainly stood. And he was nothing if not consistent. And thus, with zero precedent, minimal ceremony, and only slight confusion from the mule himself, Smudge the Mule became the elected mayor of the town that didn't care to stop him. You smile. Because of course he did. The morning after the election, the town woke slowly, like always. Chickens wandered. Biscuits baked. A gentle breeze rolled across the dew-damp fence posts. And in front of the general store, pinned neatly beneath a horseshoe paperweight, sat a sign that read, "Mayor-elect Smudge will address the town shortly after breakfast." The sign was not signed by anyone, but most folks suspected Henry McBride, the blacksmith's apprentice, who had a soft spot for mischief and once tried to organize a three-legged race using only goats. Naturally, no one expected Smudge to actually deliver a speech. The mule, after all, had a complicated relationship with vocal expression. He was capable of producing brays that ranged from mildly contemplative to someone is throwing soup at the moon, but he used them sparingly. Still, a crowd gathered near the hitching post where Smudge usually spent his mornings swatting flies with the precision of a concert violinist. He stood there now, chewing the same sprig of hay he'd had in his mouth since late September, blinked once, and stared out at the congregation. He did not bray. He did not shuffle. He did not even swish his tail. He merely blinked again. The crowd applauded. Because why not? Old Man Dowser patted Smudge's side and declared that there's a leader who knows when to stay quiet. It was the first and last time anyone in town would say that approvingly about a politician. Of course, having a mule as mayor came with a few practical considerations. For instance, where should he live? Smudge already had a stall behind the stables, but it seemed inappropriate to have the mayor housed between a barrel of turnips and a goat with anxiety. The town council, which at the time consisted of 3 retired schoolteachers, one overambitious grocer, and Margaret the deputy, more on her soon, decided the mayor should have a proper office. Something respectable, said Miss Waverly. But mule-sized, added Mr. Boone, who had once built a chicken coop so large it was mistaken for a chapel. So plans were drawn. Not architectural plans, per se. More like enthusiastic doodles with arrows pointing to things like hay nook and snack drawer, carrots only. They decided to repurpose an old tool shed that stood beside the town well. It hadn't held tools since the bucket incident of '73, but it had potential, a sloped roof, 3 walls still upright, and a door that could be removed to make way for a large quadruped. Construction began at the crack of 9:45 a.m., overseen by Margaret, who was simultaneously town deputy, postmaster, and the only person who knew how to file taxes without making a mess of the ink. Margaret is worth a moment of your time. Tall, even-tempered, and seemingly immune to foolishness, she wore her spectacles on a chain like a sword and spoke with the kind of calm that could soothe a stampede. She had been deputy for 7 years and had long ago accepted that the town she served often veered from common sense, but never from charm. When the election results came in, Margaret did not argue. She adjusted her paperwork, created a new filing category labeled elected livestock, and began making space in her week for hoof-related scheduling conflicts. It was Margaret who oversaw the transformation of the shed into Smudge's mayoral office. The walls were reinforced. The roof was patched. A salt lick was installed near the window for diplomatic visitors. The floor was strewn with the finest straw available, sourced from 3 farms and taste-tested by Smudge himself. By the end of the week, it was done. A sign above the doorway, painted in careful cursive, read, Mayor Smudge, Office of Equine Affairs and Other Business. Underneath, in smaller letters, hours, variable. Snacks appreciated. Smudge was led ceremoniously to his new headquarters one sunny afternoon, with a procession consisting of a brass kettle being tapped rhythmically with a spoon, a small group of accordion players, only one of whom could play in tune, and a delegation of children tossing flower petals made of shredded paper. Smudge walked at his usual thoughtful pace, pausing only once to investigate a suspiciously shiny rock. When he arrived, the crowd hushed. He stepped inside the shed, turned in a slow, satisfied circle, sat down, well, in a mulish sort of way, and blinked. The crowd burst into cheers. Someone fired a slingshot of confetti into the air. It landed on the roof with a sound like a sneeze in velvet. That was it. Smudge was officially installed. Office, title, and all. No one expected legislation. No one expected speeches. What they expected, what they appreciated, was that Smudge gave them something to smile at. Something gentle and absurd and warm. Of course, Margaret took on the actual administrative duties. Her logic was simple. Smudge governs with presence. I'll handle the ink. She created a system. Smudge would approve decisions by standing near documents long enough for her to justify stamping them. If he knocked a paper over, it meant revise. If he ate it, well, that usually meant they were out of carrots. Historians still argue whether the town functioned better under Smudge's leadership, or if everyone was simply happier and therefore less inclined to notice potholes and fence disputes. What is known is that, for the next several months, Smudge's approval ratings remained higher than the water towers. And that, you suspect, is just the beginning. You wander through town on a particularly warm Thursday, one of those days where the air feels like it's been gently reheated, and even the flies seem to move with the sluggish dignity of bureaucrats. As you pass the mayor's office, formerly the tool shed, now upgraded with a new window box full of daisies and a modest flag made from quilt scraps, you find Smudge in his usual position. Front and center, basking in a square of sun, chewing his morning hay with the sleepy resolve of a creature who knows he can't be rushed. Margaret is inside at her desk, scribbling something briskly with a feather pen that has seen better days and at least one jam accident. Outside the shed, a notice board has been installed. It features a single piece of parchment that reads, Town Council Meeting, Friday at the stroke of second muffin. This is not a time measurement recognized anywhere else, but in this town, second muffin generally means about 11:15 a.m., depending on the bakery queue. The coming meeting will be the first with Smudge officially seated as mayor, and people are buzzing. Not frantically. This isn't a town that does anything frantically, but in the way bees buzz near a sleepy meadow, with idle curiosity and just enough motion to keep things from growing moss. Now you might be wondering, why a mule? Why did this ever happen? Historians still argue whether the vote was truly about affection for the animal, or deep-seated avoidance of decision-making. Some believe it was simply a collective wink from a town that had nothing better to do than reimagine civic engagement using carrots. Others suggest it was a test, an elaborate, hay-laden experiment to see if calm, consistency, and 4 sturdy hooves could outgovern hot air and elbow patches. Either way, Smudge had become the symbolic spine of the town. And as the meeting approached, preparations began. Margaret, ever practical, distributed an official agenda that included fence repair funding, chicken trespassing complaints, naming the new public nap zone, celebratory oat allocation for the mayor. She pinned it to the inside of the office and then, after a thoughtful pause, attached a second version with the items rearranged in order of Smudge's likely interest. Mayor or not, he had clear priorities. On Friday, folks began arriving for the council meeting. Some brought folding chairs, others brought pies. One elderly couple brought a harmonium just in case the meeting needed ambience. Smudge was escorted in ceremonial fashion, meaning someone tossed a handful of hay down the path, and he followed it like a pilgrim to snack-based salvation. The meeting was held under the awning of the general store, because the sun was uncooperative, and the old town hall had been overtaken by raccoons the year prior. The raccoons were eventually evicted, but not without negotiating the return of several decorative spoons. Smudge stood at the head of the gathering, next to Margaret's desk and a small barrel marked Mayor's Inkwell, which was actually just molasses with aspirations. Margaret tapped a spoon on a mug and called the meeting to order. First item: the fence on the west pasture had collapsed again. Discussion followed. The fence, apparently, had long been disliked by the local sheep, who saw it as both a spiritual insult and a physical inconvenience. A new design was proposed, one with wider posts and a mural of clouds to make it more emotionally welcoming. Smudge approved this by blinking twice and licking the rim of the molasses barrel. Second item: chicken trespassing. Now, chickens are not known for respecting boundaries, particularly the ones owned by Miss Elvira, who trained hers to seek shiny objects and had, unintentionally, created a small feathered crime syndicate. Several townsfolk shared stories of missing buttons, teaspoons, and in one case, a monocle. Solutions were proposed. Chicken-specific pathways. Decorative chicken hats to indicate permission. Hiring a rooster as a crossing guard, ultimately dismissed for temperament issues. Smudge wandered over to the pile of notes and sat on them. Margaret interpreted this as temporarily tabled. Third item: naming the public nap zone. This was the shady patch of grass near the mill pond, unofficially used for midday rests, cat lounging, and occasional poetry readings. Suggestions were gathered from a small box labeled "Name That Patch," and included Snooze Hill, the Dozy Dandelion, Whisper Grass, Place of the Great Lie-Down. Smudge stood and walked to the fourth name, then promptly fell asleep. Unanimous approval followed. Last item: celebratory oats. These were proposed not just as a treat for Smudge, but as an ongoing civic tradition, to be awarded to town figures who had contributed to the general mood. The motion passed with cheers and one tearful toast from Mr. Prescott, who had always wanted to be publicly acknowledged for his decorative wheelbarrow collection. With that, the meeting adjourned. Smudge awoke, stretched, and slowly wandered back to his office. Margaret gathered her notes, folded them into a tidy stack, and placed them in the drawer marked actions taken while the mayor was chewing. You follow the townsfolk as they scatter to their routines, some to bake, some to nap, one to chase a particularly fast chicken wearing a stolen ring. And as you pass the mayor's office once more, you catch a glimpse of Smudge standing peacefully by the open window, staring out at a town that had somehow become both sillier and better organized all at once. No speeches. No slogans. Just hay, patience, and a deep-seated commitment to standing still in the right place. The sun rises late the next day, or at least it seems that way. You blink awake to a sky the color of damp parchment, and the scent of bread, yeasty, determined, drifts through the cracked window from the bakery down the road. It's the kind of morning that makes you pause at the edge of your bed, socks in hand, wondering whether the day will be productive or politely unhurried. In town, things are already in motion. Well, motion in this place is a generous word. Let's say gently arranged progress. And at the center of it all, as expected, stands Smudge. He's stationed himself near the well, where the townspeople gather to gossip while pretending to need water. It's mostly ceremonial. The well's been dry since the thunderstorm of '71 turned it into a raccoon lounge. But people still come, mostly out of habit. Smudge stands there, jaw slowly revolving in a rhythmic chew, and folks nod respectfully as they pass, as if greeting an old philosopher mid-thought. Someone's draped a sash over his back today, deep blue, with Honorable Mayor stitched across it in crooked but enthusiastic needlework. He seems unbothered. This morning, the buzz is about the election. Not Smudge's, of course. That ship, hay bale, really, has sailed. No, the gossip now is about the election that led to Smudge's moment of glory, the great non-event, the accidental apathy parade, the time when nearly everyone in town shrugged at democracy until a four-legged candidate stepped in. You sip from a mug of tepid coffee, half chicory, half confusion, and listen as two older men sit on a bench beside the general store, discussing it with all the urgency of a chess match on a windy day. "Well, I told them," says one, poking his walking stick in the dust. "Told them it would happen." "You did not." "Did so." "You said someone might run as a mule, not be one." "Well," the man concedes, "close enough." The original election notice had gone up on a Tuesday. A plain slip of paper, pinned between a poster for a lost spoon, long story, and a slightly sticky pamphlet on hand-churned butter techniques. The notice read, "Mayoral nominations now open. Inquire at the store or whisper to Doris." Doris was the clerk. She had no official election responsibilities but had the sort of personality that made people confess things, vote, and buy more raisins than intended. The deadline was generous, 2 weeks. Long enough, in theory, to allow any citizen with a touch of ambition or a vendetta against fence ordinances to step forward. But this town was not bursting with ambition. Instead, names were floated and dropped like fishing lines without bait. Someone suggested Elias Drury, but he had recently declared himself emotionally retired after a beet-pickling incident. Clara Titch was considered, until she revealed her plan to outlaw stairs in favor of dignified ramps only, which sounded more logistical than anyone wanted to deal with. At some point, someone nominated a pie. Not a person who made pies. A literal pie. It pulled better than expected. And so, as the deadline loomed and the list of real contenders remained shorter than a chicken's stride, Jasper Tull had his moment. You picture it now, Jasper, seated at the back of the saloon with a boot on the table and a smile curling beneath his enormous mustache. He's watching the room with that look, the one that says, "I'm about to do something you'll remember and regret in equal measure." He strolls to the notice board, pulls a pencil from behind his ear, and scrawls in bold. "Smudge the Mule. Under relevant skills," he writes. "Patient. Resistant to bribes unless apples count. Already familiar with town layout. No one stops him. No one questions it. Someone actually claps. And because this is a town where suggestion drifts easily into ritual, Smudge's candidacy becomes more than a joke. It becomes the joke everyone's in on. That's important, you think? Because sometimes, when everyone's in on the joke, it stops being about irony. It becomes affection. Shared absurdity. A slow-motion community wink. By the time ballots are prepared, hand-lettered, lovingly smudged, Smudge is on the list. Not at the bottom, not as a write-in, but right there in the middle, like he belonged. And come voting day, people voted. Because voting, here, wasn't about power. It was about showing up. Picking something. Or someone. Or some mule. The ballots were counted in the back of the general store, using a system that involved tally marks, a bowl of beans, and Doris nodding solemnly over each one like a fortune teller of civic engagement. When Smudge's name came up again and again, there wasn't a gasp or an outcry. Just laughter. Some quiet surprise. And the sound of someone opening a second pie, presumably for emotional support. But the vote was real. And in the end, Smudge wasn't the candidate they planned for. He was the candidate they deserved. You imagine Jasper tipping his hat, Doris sighing with gentle amusement, and the clerk writing Mayor, Smudge in the dusty ledger, right beneath a forgotten entry that reads Tuesday, beans shortage. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Miss Winifred called it a crisis of governance and dignity, but she also thought umbrellas were a government plot, so no one really followed her lead. Even then, the town had a quiet understanding. Maybe it's not about the best candidate. Maybe it's about the one who won't ruin anything. And in that category, Smudge was unbeaten. You passed the general store again, now with a new sign in the window. Official Smudge Day, planning meeting this Sunday. Below it, in smaller text. Yes, there will be cake. You smile. Because of course there will be cake. And probably hay. It's late afternoon now, and the sun is doing that thing where it slips sideways through the trees like it's trying not to interrupt. Long shadows stretch across the town green, and even the squirrels seem to tiptoe. You stroll slowly past the mayor's office, formerly shed, now humble seat of Mule-led governance, and spot a small gathering forming near the notice board. They're huddled around a fresh announcement, freshly pinned with a corncob tack. Official oath ceremony for Mayor Smudge, Sunday, 3rd biscuit past sunrise. Because of course there has to be a ceremony. You can't just let a mule be mayor without a bit of pageantry. That's practically unconstitutional. Or at least unsociable. The planning, naturally, falls to Margaret. You find her in the back room of the general store, papers fanned out before her like some bureaucratic tarot spread. She's got lists for everything: guests, refreshments, ceremonial carrots, wiggle room for unscheduled braying. Is there an oath? You ask. She doesn't look up. There is now. You lean over to peek. The document she's working on reads, I, Smudge, do solemnly chew, stomp, or otherwise indicate agreement to uphold the mood, mischief, and modest order of this town, to the best of my munching ability. Below that, witnessed by at least 2 humans and a respectful silence. Across the page is a stamp in the shape of a hoof. You assume it's ceremonial. You hope it's not sticky. News of the upcoming ceremony spreads, not through official channels but via the traditional grapevine, pie exchanges, fence chat, and Henry the livery boy, who tells absolutely everyone everything all the time whether they asked or not. Preparations begin. Someone suggests a band. The town has no official ensemble, but there's an accordion, a washboard, 2 banjos, and a collection of empty jugs with varying musical tones. Close enough. Mrs. Tilbury volunteers to bake the cake, a 3-layer oat-based monstrosity with frosting made from molasses and mystery. A side note in her recipe simply reads, Do not feed to geese again. Children are tasked with flower petals, specifically dandelions, since they're free, cooperative, and taste fine if accidentally eaten mid-ceremony. The location is set, the shady patch near the mill pond, now officially named Place of the Great Liedown. It's soft, quiet, and just far enough from town to allow a mule to wander without accidentally joining a quilting circle. On the morning of the event, the town gathers. There's a pleasant clatter of folding chairs. A faint undertone of molasses and overcooked carrots. The air is rich with anticipation and pollen. Smudge is led gently to a flat stone in the center of the grass. He stands there, regal in the way only a large, indifferent mammal can be. He's been fitted with a sash. This one reads Mayor-elect still. Someone added glitter. Margaret steps forward with the scroll. She clears her throat, not to silence anyone but to buy herself a second of composure. You sense she didn't think she'd ever swear in a meal. But she's handling it with her usual grace. She begins, Dear citizens. Today, we gather to celebrate the odd, the calm, and the strangely competent leadership of our newly elected mayor, Smudge. He has been chosen, by ballot, by bribe, of apples, by the indifference of those more easily distracted, and by the will of this community. A light laugh ripples through the crowd. She continues, unrolling the scroll slowly. Smudge, if you are prepared to accept this role in the fullest sense available to you, please indicate your agreement. Smudge blinks once, then twice. Then, perfectly on cue, he lets out a single, resonant bray. It sounds oddly, like a hymn being hummed through a tuba filled with sawdust. The crowd erupts in applause. The scroll is signed. Well, Margaret signs it, then gently presses Smudge's hoof to a stamp pad and applies the print beside her name. The press leaves a slightly smudged impression. It is, as Margaret notes aloud, poetic. Then comes the cake. It is large, beige, and possibly flammable. A ceremonial slice is cut and offered to Smudge, who sniffs it, considers its dignity, and chooses instead to nibble a bouquet someone accidentally dropped. This is met with even more applause, and a few cheers of symbolic resistance. Next is the parade, if you can call it that. A slow meander through town, really. Smudge walks ahead, flanked by children tossing dandelions and 2 goats wearing ribbons. Margaret marches at his side carrying a clipboard like a sword of office. The townsfolk follow, each step a little lighter than the last. At one point, A gust of wind lifts the sash from Smudge's back and carries it skyward like a celebratory flag. It lands in the bakery chimney, unnoticed, and is later mistaken for a divine omen by a passing bread delivery boy. The parade ends, as all things must, at the mayor's office. Smudge enters, settles down, and naps so hard the daffodils in the window box droop in sympathy. The town disperses slowly. No rush. No shouting. Just the satisfied shuffle of people who have witnessed something profoundly silly and unexpectedly lovely. You linger. You peer into the office, where Margaret has carefully arranged the signed scroll in a modest frame. It leans on a shelf beside a tin of oats labeled "Do Not File." Smudge snores once. You step back, let the door click gently shut, and turn toward home. A town with a mule as mayor shouldn't work. But here, it doesn't just work. It hums. The following Monday begins with a soft drizzle. Not enough to soak your shoes, but enough to give the world that damp paper smell. Trees glisten. Chickens fluff up. And the town seems to walk slightly slower, as if wrapped in an invisible towel. Inside the mayor's office, Smudge is already awake. You can tell because his ears are rotating like slow-motion weather vanes, tracking every creak of the porch and the rhythmic squelch of Margaret's boots on wet grass. She enters carrying a canvas bag full of new papers, her coat dotted with raindrops, spectacles fogged up from the chill. She sets the bag on the desk, pulls out a thick folder, and gives Smudge a knowing glance. "Today's going to be paperwork heavy," she murmurs. "Try to stay awake for at least one bray." Smudge blinks. That's a lot for him. You find a corner of the room and settle in. There's something deeply hypnotic about the sound of Margaret's pen scratching along the page, the occasional creak of wood, and the faint smell of hay and ink. The agenda for the day includes, among other things, reviewing the new signage policy. Some locals want to post more creative road signs. Approving a budget request from the local pie guild, they want more rhubarb. Clarifying the use of the town bell. Last week someone rang it to announce a very large toad. Let's start with the signs. The current signage in town is minimal. A few wooden arrows that say things like "that way," "not that way," and "maybe here." A petition has circulated requesting more specific labels: "public sitting rock," "quiet spot for sighing," and "no ducks beyond this point," strongly worded. Margaret reads each proposed sign aloud. Smudge, seated near the window, swivels one ear. That's all. After the fourth reading, he slowly leans forward, nosing a particular sheet off the desk. It reads, "Library, probably closed, but worth a try." "Approved," Margaret says, making a note. That one does feel authentic. Next is the Pie Guild. Now, this guild, unofficial but highly influential, meets every Tuesday in the back of the apothecary and has single-handedly sustained the town's cinnamon import industry. Their request is modest: 5 extra rhubarb plants in the community garden and 1 replacement rolling pin after the last one was accidentally flung into a rain barrel during a particularly competitive crust-folding demonstration. Smudge doesn't move during this part. He simply sighs, a long, wheezy exhale that stirs a loose curl of hay. "Motion passed," Margaret says, scribbling with satisfaction. Then comes the bell. The town bell was installed decades ago, not for emergencies, but because someone won a bet that said they could install a bell using only a ladder, 3 goats, and a sense of purpose. It hangs just above the bakery and is rung for very specific reasons: announcing town meetings, celebrating weddings, warning of runaway geese. Occasionally, spotting a double rainbow, optional. Last Thursday, someone rang it, twice, to alert the town to a toad of unusual size, which turned out to be a rock wearing moss and confidence. The incident has sparked a debate. Should the bell have guidelines? Should toads qualify? Margaret opens the floor. The floor, in this case, is metaphorical. It's just you, Smudge, and a jar of dried lavender labeled "Do Not Confuse with Spices." Smudge shifts. He raises one hoof and delicately taps the jar. Margaret considers this. Special exception for amphibians over a certain width, she decides, jotting it down. But someone has to measure. You glance outside. The rain has slowed to a gentle mist. A young boy passes by with an umbrella made of spoons. He waves. The town waves back. The afternoon stretches on with small tasks. A letter arrives via Mrs. Callahan's nephew, who volunteers as the unofficial courier whenever he's not busy carving faces into potatoes. The envelope is sealed with wax and smells faintly of licorice. It's from a nearby town, Wickham's Bluff. They've heard of Smudge. Apparently, word has spread. Mule elected mayor. No lawsuits. No coups. Just calm governance and occasional naps in the flower beds. The letter is polite, curious, and signed by their own mayor, a man named Horace Greebley, who includes the line, "Should Smudge ever wish to engage in intertown diplomacy, our goat park is open to visiting dignitaries." Margaret reads the letter aloud, then looks to Smudge. He licks his lips. Possibly in diplomacy. Possibly in hunger. Noted, Margaret says. We'll send oats and regards. She drafts a reply, lets you seal it, and ties it to the boy's satchel with a ribbon that reads, "For official use, probably." Outside, a cart squeaks by carrying turnips shaped suspiciously like famous philosophers. This is not new. Last year it was cabbages with poetry carved into them. The year before, cucumbers shaped into question marks. The town cycles through odd traditions like some places cycle seasons. You close the office door gently behind you, leaving Smudge half napping, half governing, and wholly content. Back in the square, the signpost now holds a new direction. Office of the Mayor. Wisdom hooves here. Someone's added a tiny top hat to the top of the post. It feels right. And whether it's the steady drizzle, the smell of lavender, or just the quiet genius of a town that elected a mule without panic or panic attacks, you feel something rare. You feel like things might, just might, be exactly the way they should be. The next morning, you wake to the sound of hoofbeats, not hurried ones, but the calm, deliberate clop of someone, or rather some mule, making his way down the main street. Outside your window, Smudge is on his constitutional. It's not an official duty, this daily walk, but everyone treats it like one. The mule's slow circuit through town has become both a civic ritual and a kind of weather report. If Smudge walks clockwise, expect a quiet day. Counterclockwise? Someone's baked something experimental. Today, he's moving counterclockwise. You step outside, scarf wrapped around your neck, and join the others who've paused whatever they were doing just to watch him plod along. He stops in front of the cobbler's shop, stares thoughtfully at a boot drying on the windowsill, and then keeps walking, tail swishing precisely twice. People wave. Someone offers a carrot from their coat pocket. It's refused, politely, but firmly. Smudge is a mule of principle. By the time he reaches the bakery, there's a small cluster of children waiting with a paper banner that reads, "Hooves of Honor." Smudge stops. He blinks. The children cheer. This sort of spontaneous celebration has become more common lately. Since the oath ceremony, Smudge has enjoyed what Margaret refers to, with a straight face, as a surge in approval metrics. It helps that he hasn't made a single speech, proclamation, or questionable budget decision. His silence is seen as wisdom. His stillness, interpreted as careful listening. You stroll behind the children as they scatter, trailing dandelions and soft laughter, and you wonder what's next for a town governed by equine calm and communal whimsy. Margaret, of course, is already 3 steps ahead. You find her in the records room, a tiny, poorly lit closet behind the general store that smells of damp parchment and, oddly, nutmeg. She's knee-deep in ledgers, cross-referencing civic documents with a quill that squeaks like a rusty mouse. "We need to discuss the honorary town roles," she says without looking up. "People want to help." Help with what? Whatever it is Smudge isn't doing. Which, you admit, is most things. And so begins what becomes known, unofficially, as the Auxiliary Council of Probably Useful Persons. It starts with a sign-up sheet. Well, 2 sheets, really. The first one asks, "Want to help the mayor?" The second, "Think you know better than the mayor?" Both sheets fill up. Many people sign both. Margaret sorts the volunteers into roles. Some are obvious. Eliza Hockley, who knows everyone's birthday and once mailed 123 thank you notes in a single day, is made Minister of Celebrations. Hector Bundy, retired carpenter and full-time whittler, is appointed Fence Maintenance Czar. Doris, the clerk who knows more than she says and always smells faintly of cloves, is promoted to official Secretary of Secrecy. No one asks what that means. Everyone nods. Some roles are less obvious. A young boy insists on being Deputy of Whistles. He's given a sash and a recorder. So far, he's used it to announce precisely nothing. A woman with 3 parrots volunteers to lead avian liaison affairs. She submits daily reports. They are written in seed paste. Still, the system works, or at least it wobbles along with charm and moderate consistency. Smudge continues to serve as the unmoving sun around which this sleepy solar system rotates. Each morning, new decrees appear on the notice board outside his office. Not written by him, obviously, but by volunteers interpreting his actions. Today's decree reads, "Let all crosswalks now include a slow lane for pondering." Apparently, this was inspired by Smudge standing in one for 15 minutes while gazing at a puddle. Another declares, "Tuesday is now a soft-speaking day. Raise your voice only in song." You suspect Margaret wrote that one after a heated debate over soup textures at the cafe. Historians still argue whether these auxiliary roles had any lasting civic effect. The town remained clean, cheerful, and moderately functional. But more than that, something else had settled in, something gentler. People had begun to participate in their own governance not because they had to, but because it amused them to. They showed up not for glory, but for the small delight of saying, "Well, I suppose I am the deputy of unattended umbrellas." You pause outside the mayor's office and watch Smudge standing in the doorway, one hoof tucked under his belly, eyes half-lidded. Someone has placed a daisy crown on his head. He doesn't react. He simply stands there, radiating the sort of calm normally reserved for monks or confident teapots. Inside, Margaret writes quietly, the scratch of her pen almost meditative. You wonder if any of this would work anywhere else. If a bigger town, or a louder one, could survive even a day with a mule in charge. But here? Here it thrives. At sunset, the auxiliary council meets under the big tree in the square. They bring folding chairs, sketchbooks, and mismatched mugs of tea. Someone brings cookies. Someone else brings a banjo. They sit in a wide circle, laugh at nothing in particular, and make decisions so gently that even the breeze seems to pause to listen. Smudge is not present. He's already turned in for the night, bedded down in his office with a blanket someone crocheted with the words "steady as she goes" stitched along the edge. Margaret glances out the window and smiles. And you sit there too, under the fading light, thinking that maybe leadership isn't always about charisma or vision or strategy. Sometimes, maybe, it's about being still enough to let others step forward. Sometimes, the best thing a mayor can do is chew hay and take a nap. The next few weeks slip by in the sleepy rhythm the town is famous for. One soft boot step at a time, one polite bell chime before noon, one slow nod of approval as someone paints a fence for the 4th time because the shade of white didn't feel quite right. Smudge remains unwavering in his duties, which mostly include standing still, eating quietly, and existing with a level of dignity most humans can only dream of. Occasionally, he shifts his weight from one side to the other in what Margaret refers to as executive recalibration. Meanwhile, the Auxiliary Council continues to find new and increasingly unnecessary responsibilities for itself. Some might call it bureaucracy. The townsfolk, however, prefer the term hobby with paperwork. Today's session begins with a new proposal from the Minister of Celebrations, Eliza Hockley, who, it must be said, approaches every town matter as though it were a birthday party that just hadn't been decorated yet. "I propose," she says, adjusting her hat, which resembles a teacup if it had feelings, "that we designate a new town holiday." She lets the word hang in the air like whipped cream. Margaret raises an eyebrow from her station beneath the mayor's office window. "We already have 3. "Exactly." Eliza beams. "Far too few." There's a general murmur of sleepy agreement. Celebrations are, after all, easy to support. They come with snacks. What's the occasion? Someone asks. Eliza unfolds a sheet of paper. It's in honor of the day Smudge saved the millpond. Silence. Then Doris, the clerk, leans in. Wait, what? Eliza smiles wider. It's more symbolic than literal. Turns out, 3 days prior, Smudge had wandered near the pond just as a stray barrel came rolling down the hill. A barrel that could have, in theory, splashed mud into the mill gears, which might have slowed production for several hours. Instead, Smudge stood in its path. The barrel bumped gently into him, and stopped. He blinked. The barrel wobbled. Crisis averted. The event hadn't been noticed by many, just one passing child and a napping goose, but Eliza insisted that it was a sign of Smudge's unspoken vigilance. He felt the danger, she said, and chose peace. Historians still argue whether the barrel was even moving fast enough to bruise a dandelion. Margaret mutters under her breath. Still, the proposal passes unanimously. The holiday is named Pond Guarding Day. It is to be observed annually, preferably with reflective pond watching, a light snack involving oats, and a group hum in the key of mild contentment. The first celebration is set for the following week. You watch the planning unfold like a town-wide picnic that forgot to end. There are rehearsals for the humming portion. Someone designs commemorative buttons that say Mule knew best, and a local child writes a dramatic reenactment titled Clop of Destiny. The script includes a surprise musical number, and a dance for anyone dressed as a barrel. By the time the actual day arrives, the entire town gathers near the pond. A long table is set up under the weeping willow, covered with pastries, paper fans, and a single large sign that reads, "Welcome to Pond Guarding Day. Do not splash the mayor." Smudge arrives right on time, escorted by 2 council members wearing sashes made from dish towels. He looks vaguely interested in the proceedings, though it's also possible he's just spotted a particularly chewy patch of grass. The ceremony begins with a speech from Eliza, who uses the words hero, symbol of peace, and pond guardian spirit with such enthusiasm that the ducks near the bank quack in approval. Then comes the reenactment. 3 children in makeshift costumes roll a barrel toward a plush Smudge replica made from pillows and yarn. At the exact moment of impact, timed down to the note, one of the children yells, "Mayor Smudge, stand strong!" and the audience breaks into gentle applause. Margaret is the only one who doesn't clap. She's too busy writing up the event summary for the town archive. Her notes read, "Observed first annual Pond Guarding Day. No injuries. Barrel survived." Smudge blinked. Festivities declared a success. The event concludes with everyone taking a moment of quiet appreciation. This is not enforced. It just happens. People sip lemonade. A few lay on picnic blankets. Someone strums a tune on a banjo that may or may not have strings. Smudge is offered the first oat tart. He sniffs it. Pauses. Then decides, for reasons known only to him, that today is not an oat tart day. The crowd respects this. It becomes tradition. You linger after the others have gone, watching the pond reflect the sky in ripples and light. Smudge remains by the water's edge, unmoving, framed like a statue in a town that needs no monuments. His shadow stretches long across the grass, not quite touching the barrel, which now rests forever under a plaque that reads, "Almost rolled. Didn't. Thanks, Smudge." The mayor returns to his office by twilight, hooves padding softly against the earth. His daisy crown from the last event is now woven into the trim above his doorway, alongside a sign someone left that says, "Naps welcome. Meetings tolerated." You imagine Margaret filing that under public sentiment. Later that evening, as the stars blink into view and the town settles into its nightly hush, you think back on everything that's happened. From accidental election to oat tart diplomacy to official pond guarding day, this town has somehow crafted a story that never needed to be logical, just kind. And all of it, improbably, traces back to one Mule who never asked for the job, but didn't mind standing still while everyone else got better at doing theirs. Morning arrives with a pleasant surprise. the bakery has debuted a new pastry in honor of Smudge. It's called the Mayor's Fold, an oat-filled, molasses-glazed pocket of chewy serenity shaped vaguely like a hoofprint if you squint and tilt your head. Naturally, it sells out within an hour, even though the reviews include phrases like ambitiously dense and a texture that challenges expectations. You wander by just in time to hear Doris explaining to a customer that the recipe came to her in a dream involving a carousel and a very persuasive goose. Nobody questions this. Dreams have been responsible for at least 4 minor ordinances and 1 surprisingly successful fence redesign. Across the square, Margaret is tacking up a new notice outside the mayor's office. Town hall discussion tonight. All citizens, opinions, and cookies welcome. She adds in smaller print. Please do not try to seat the mayor at the table. He prefers standing. You know what this is about. Word's gotten around that neighboring towns are intrigued by the Smudge system. Some are skeptical. Others curious. A few, like Wickham's Bluff, the goat-hugging town, have even sent polite envoys bearing jam and municipal questions. Now, Margaret wants to hear from the people. What is this town's philosophy of leadership? Is it anarchy in slow motion? Accidental utopia? Or just an extended civic prank that nobody wants to end? You return that evening just as the string lights over the square flicker on, one by one, like stars getting their act together. Folding chairs form a loose semicircle near the well. Smudge is present, of course, chewing gently and blinking at intervals that seem far too meaningful to be random. Margaret steps up with her clipboard and, with the ease of someone who's chaired meetings full of jam-covered fingers and nap-prone citizens, calls things to order. Thank you all for coming, she begins. Tonight's purpose is simple. Other towns are asking how we've managed to remain, well, functional. With a mule. As mayor. She gestures vaguely towards Smudge, who snorts, then resumes his thoughtful chewing. We're not here to change anything. But if we're going to be an example of alternative governance, we ought to at least try to explain ourselves. The first to speak is old Mr. Hartley, a man with a beard like a tired broom and a deep fondness for structured chaos. I'll tell you why it works, he says. It's because Smudge doesn't tell us what to do. A few nods. He just is. Like a weather vane, or a moral compass made of hooves. He's our reminder to slow down and think things through. Or not think too hard, someone else chimes in. There's a polite ripple of laughter. Then Eliza adds, I think it works because we all started asking, well, what can I do to help, instead of waiting to be told. And that's rare. You notice a few people scribbling notes. Not reporters, just residents who've gotten into the habit of journaling strange civic events. One of them even has a page labeled Mule-based wisdoms. Another hand goes up. It's Harold the blacksmith, whose voice always sounds like it's coming from behind a waterfall. I used to think you needed someone in charge to settle disputes. Someone loud. Decisive. Waving scrolls. But somehow, knowing the mayor is just munching? That makes me want to be the one who stays calm. He looks around. I mean, if he can lead without shouting, maybe I can live without snapping. There's silence for a moment. Not heavy. Just thoughtful. Then Margaret asks, so if other towns want to adopt this approach, what should they know? Several voices rise at once. Start with a calm animal. Definitely hire a Margaret. Don't expect results. Appreciate surprises. Make sure your mayor doesn't kick. Take turns doing things. Most of them aren't that hard. Get comfortable with confusion, it passes. And from the back, also, designate someone to clean up mayoral deposits. Everyone laughs. Even Smudge shifts in a way that almost resembles amusement. Then Doris stands up, holding a cookie and the weight of subtle wisdom. I think the real secret is that nobody here is trying to be in charge of everything. We all kind of pick a piece. Hold it up for a while. Let someone else take it when we're tired. And we don't fuss if the piece is shaped weird. She pauses. And Smudge? He's the blank space. The breathing room. The reminder that governance isn't about control, it's about care. Margaret nods slowly, like she's sealing that into the town records with invisible ink. No one speaks for a moment after that. Someone strums a chord on a banjo, absent-mindedly. A dog snores near the bakery steps. Smudge flaps one ear in what might be gratitude or just a reaction to a nearby moth. The meeting ends not with a bang or gavel, but with someone passing around a second batch of cookies and the phrase, "Well, that seems about enough." As you walk home through the soft hush of twilight, you pass the mayor's office one last time. A candle flickers in the window. Inside, Margaret is closing the day's notes, and Smudge is already curled into his favorite corner, snoring faintly, a sprig of clover still tucked in the side of his mouth like a bedtime mint. Outside, a new sign has been tacked above the door. Office of the Mayor. All welcome, especially the quiet ones. And in smaller text, just beneath. If you have questions, ask Margaret. If you have oats, ask Smudge. You smile, the way people do when something makes sense without needing to. Because here in this slow, stubborn little town, a mule doesn't just serve as mayor. He serves as a mirror. Reflecting back what happens when people stop shouting, start listening, and maybe, just maybe, choose to believe that governing with gentleness isn't the strangest idea after all. 2 days after the town hall, a letter arrives tied to the leg of a pigeon with a pronounced limp and what appears to be a tiny feathered necktie. It's from the village of Little Duck Ford, and it begins quite formally. Dear esteemed equine leadership and associates. That's how you know this is going to be good. Margaret reads it aloud from the mayor's porch while Smudge chews his way through a patch of clover that's somehow growing in the shape of a question mark. The letter goes on to say that Little Duck Ford, a village roughly the size of an ambitious hedgerow, has decided to try their own animal-led governance system. We have elected, by unanimous picnic ballot, one Mr. Buttons, a rather elderly goat of stoic disposition and a fondness for melon rinds. Apparently, Mr. Buttons was chosen after an unfortunate debate among the human candidates ended in 3 stubbed toes, a spilled tureen of turnip soup, and a banjo-related misunderstanding. By comparison, the goat exuded charm. Little Duck Ford is requesting any and all guidance on running a town with a nonverbal, 4-legged figurehead. Margaret clutches the letter like it's the first chapter of a mystery novel, and immediately calls a meeting of the Auxiliary Council. By late afternoon, the chairs are back in the square, the banjo is tuned, in its own eccentric way, and the council is gathered with serious expressions and extremely unserious snacks. The first to speak is, of course, Eliza. We must send them a guide, she says. A proper handbook. A field manual of mule-based municipal management. Harold, the blacksmith, chimes in. With diagrams, he says, as though this were the most essential component. Doris adds, and a section on oat budgeting. Soon everyone's pitching ideas. Include the cake protocols. Mention that staring contests with the mayor are non-binding. What about wind etiquette? Explain the bell system, especially the toad clause. List approved forms of nonverbal agreement, bray, blink, tail, swish. Add a glossary, chew paws, ponder hooves, official nap stance. Margaret scribbles furiously in her notebook. You lean over to glance. She's titled the document, So You've Elected a Livestock Mayor, a Survival Guide. The table of contents includes such gems as Chapter 3, Understanding Hoof Diplomacy. Chapter 7, The Art of Letting Things Happen, Even If They're Confusing. Appendix A, Celebrations that don't require speeches or clapping. Appendix B, Oats, Currency or Courtesy? Within the week, the guide is written, edited, bound in recycled paper from the abandoned paper mill, and packed with care alongside a jar of jam labeled Mayoral Reserve. Do not spread without permission. The pigeon, now dubbed Sir Fluffsworth by unanimous whim, is gently resupplied with breadcrumbs and pointed skyward, bearing the town's first diplomatic dispatch. You watch him go, spiraling off like a lazy corkscrew, and can't help but admire the elegance of a town that answers political inquiry with a baked good and a 22-page pamphlet. That evening, Margaret holds a quiet celebration. Not a party, those have punch bowls. This is more of a mutual sitting and appreciative nodding event held in the grassy lot behind the mayor's office. There are fireflies. There's a breeze. Someone brings cheese that smells like socks and tastes like dreams. Smudge is there, of course, reclining in his official patch of worn grass. His silhouette against the lantern-lit backdrop looks almost majestic, if you squint and ignore the gentle snoring. Eliza stands and offers a toast. To wisdom and stillness, she says. To the leadership we didn't expect, the governance we didn't understand, and the mule who never once asked for any of this. Harold raises a mug. To surprising systems that somehow don't collapse. Doris adds, to the kinds of towns where someone always brings extra napkins. They all clink cups. You find yourself thinking that governance, like gardening, might work best when no one rushes. When things are tended, not forced. Encouraged, not demanded. Margaret sits beside you and says, almost to herself, maybe politics everywhere needs more animals. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. Not all animals. Just the quiet ones. The ones who listen. The next morning, the mood in town is slightly different. Not serious, but focused. A new sign appears near the community garden, civic responsibility plot. Apparently each week, a different resident is assigned to tend a patch of beets while reflecting on how they can support the mayor's vision. The vision, of course, is mostly hay-oriented, but still. Symbolism matters. The first participant is a shy teenager who wears too many scarves and quietly weeds for an hour, then writes a poem about patience. It's pinned to the garden gate and soon joined by others. Before long, the civic responsibility plot has its own bulletin board, bench, and a small carved sign that reads, Tend Soil. Tend Society. Smudge, naturally, has not commented. But he does walk by more often than usual, pausing to sniff the air in a way that says either good crops or that smells faintly like carrots. Either way, the message is clear. The town is changing, not dramatically, but gently. Like the way a cat might turn once before settling deeper into a sunbeam. And through it all, the mayor remains steadfast. His presence has become a kind of balm, an anchor without urgency, a reminder that everything doesn't always need to move faster, or louder, or more efficiently to matter. It can just be. And here, being is enough. One of the more curious developments in the Smudge administration begins, as many great innovations do, with a nap and a misplaced turnip. It's a quiet afternoon, one of those drifting, golden kinds where the air seems politely uninterested in doing much of anything. Smudge is dozing under his favorite tree just outside the mayor's office, snout resting against a lopsided flower pot. Margaret is inside reorganizing the drawer labeled documents of questionable importance, and across the square, a young boy named Toby is attempting to juggle 3 root vegetables for reasons known only to himself. The turnip, unfortunately, does not behave. It arcs skyward, wobbles mid-flight, and lands squarely on Smudge's head. He blinks once. Then twice. Then, miraculously, he stands. You could hear a hay-flake drop. Toby freezes, clutching the remaining 2 vegetables like contraband. Margaret rushes out, half a paperclip still in her hair. And everyone nearby pauses, because it's not every day the mayor moves with actual purpose. Smudge takes a step forward. Then another. And just like that, he begins walking a perfectly straight path down the central lane of town, steady, dignified, and with a mysterious sense of mission. Naturally, the townsfolk follow. Not because they think there's an emergency. Smudge does not rush. But because you never pass up a chance to witness an unscheduled Mule initiative. He leads them past the bakery, around the well, and into the old schoolhouse courtyard, which hasn't been used for anything but idle loitering and suspicious hopscotch since the school moved to a building with actual windows. There, in the exact center of the grass, he stops. He turns in a slow circle. And he lies down. Then he yawns. And resumes his nap. This event is declared, unofficially and almost immediately, the founding of what will become known as the Circle of Consensus. At first, it's just Toby and 2 confused townspeople standing there, unsure whether they're supposed to applaud or leave. But then Margaret arrives, clipboard in hand, and says the phrase that will spark a new tradition. Well, while we're here, shall we talk about the benches? The benches in question have been a minor source of civic discussion for months. They're too close together, or too far apart. Some are painted, some are plain. One creaks like a suspicious violin. And now, without planning, the community begins a calm, meandering discussion about what to do with them, all while standing in a slow circle around their napping mare. No one interrupts. No one talks over anyone. They simply take turns, share ideas, and without even realizing, come to a decision that suits just about everyone. Someone jots down the plan on a napkin. Another offers to bring tools. And just before sundown, they agree to meet again the next day, right there, same time, same grass. And thus, without proclamation or fuss, the circle of consensus is born. Within a week, it becomes a staple of town life. Every afternoon around 3, people start drifting into the courtyard. They sit in a gentle ring, on crates, stools, picnic blankets, even one person on an upturned laundry basket, and talk about whatever needs discussing. One day it's signage. Another, how to share access to the town's one very popular ladder. And Smudge? He shows up, lies in the middle, and naps with the peaceful authority of a creature who trusts his citizens completely. Margaret attends every session, of course, keeping soft notes, and humming occasionally. The mood is always unhurried, more tea than tribunal. And something fascinating happens. With Smudge as a wordless anchor, the debates stay friendly. Disagreements are softened by the soothing rhythm of his breath. Ideas are weighed more gently. Nobody leaves grumpy. Occasionally, someone leaves with a scone. The circle's unofficial motto becomes, "Come for the consensus. Stay for the breeze." Historians still argue whether this method could scale to larger towns. Some say the lack of hierarchy only works in communities where everyone has already shared a pie at some point. Others insist it's the presence of a non-judgmental mammal that keeps egos in check. A few have suggested testing the method with llamas, but the results were inconclusive and involved too much spitting. Back in your quiet town, the circle of consensus thrives. Decisions once delayed for weeks now resolve in days. Civic pride swells. A local artist paints a mural titled Sleep and Reasoning, Smudge at the center of us all. It's surprisingly moving, and slightly abstract. Smudge resembles a loaf of bread wearing spectacles. Soon, other towns begin asking about the circle. Margaret sends out another guide, this one titled, Gentle Governance, a guide to lying down near problems until they solve themselves. It includes chapters like Step 1, find a central animal. Step 2, talk in a circle. Step 3, don't rush the nap. Appendix C, suggested topics and snack pairings. Your town becomes something of a model. Not flashy, not famous, but whispered about with curiosity in council meetings across the countryside. And still, every day at 3, Smudge arrives. He plods into the courtyard, turns twice, sinks into the grass like a small, dignified boat docking for the evening, and around him, a circle forms. Not because he asks, but because he listens, with stillness, with softness, with snores so calm they could anchor ships. And maybe that's the most valuable kind of leadership there is. It's a few days after the mural unveiling. Smudge still hasn't commented, although he did stand in front of it for a full 2 minutes, which Margaret is treating as a formal endorsement, when the town receives its first visiting delegation. They arrive just before noon, riding in a gently creaking cart pulled by a suspiciously elegant sheepdog named Viola. The cart bears a small hand-painted sign that reads, Representatives of Tatterbrook, Official Inquiry and Homemade Fudge. You can't help but feel hopeful about the fudge part. Out climb 3 visitors, each with a notepad and a knitted scarf of questionable length. One of them, a bespectacled man with very round shoes, immediately approaches Margaret. We heard your mayor is, well, not technically verbal, he says, looking around as though Smudge might be behind a curtain somewhere, preparing remarks. That's correct, says Margaret, smiling with the grace of someone who has explained this hundreds of times. But he's profoundly present. The delegation is invited to observe the afternoon's circle of consensus. Margaret sets out chairs. Doris brews tea strong enough to clean a spoon, and someone thoughtfully adds an extra cushion in case Smudge decides to nap in a new spot today. The visitors sit, pens ready. The townspeople arrive gradually, as they always do, one with a crate of muffins, another with a homemade sign reading "Vote with your blanket. Sit where you agree." It's all very relaxed. Nobody rushes. Smudge appears on schedule, his pace unchanging, his expression unreadable in that majestic mule sort of way. He turns in a lazy half-circle and lowers himself onto the grass with a sigh of ancient wisdom, or indigestion. Either way, the meeting begins. Today's topic is civic lighting. The lanterns in town, while charmingly inconsistent, have been attracting moths the size of walnuts, and, more recently, 2 mildly confused bats who've been loitering near the bakery window. The proposal: trial a new style of lantern cover made from colored glass to both beautify and slightly confuse the insects. It's debated gently. One person proposes blue glass to match the town's crest, which nobody's seen in years. Another suggests amber, for warmth and glow. Someone else proposes no glass at all, but rather miniature hats for the lanterns, to give them more dignity. Margaret notes all ideas with equal weight, occasionally adding a doodle of a lantern in a bowler hat. And through it all, the delegation from Tatterbrook watches with the slowly dawning expression of people who expected chaos and found calm. At one point, the round-shoed man leans in to whisper to Margaret, "But where's the authority?" Margaret simply gestures to Smudge, who is currently chewing on a tuft of grass with the deliberate grace of someone solving the world's problems one bite at a time. The delegation stays for 2 days. They attend the nightly blanket concerts by the well, eat at least 4 variations of oat-based cuisine, and witness Smudge approve a community mural by placing a single hoofprint in wet paint, which now hangs in the library labeled Civic Endorsement, Abstract Number 1. When they leave, they do so reluctantly, promising to try a circle of consensus in their own town, possibly centered around a goose named Philippa who has shown interest in traffic calming measures. After they depart, the town returns to its usual pace, not quite slow, but satisfyingly unrushed. And then, quite unexpectedly, comes the award. No one saw it coming. One Thursday morning, a package arrives with a ribbon and a letter announcing that the town, specifically the Smudge-led governance model, has been named Most Inventive Civic Model of the Year by the Regional Association for Experimental Governance, a group whose logo is a teacup in a top hat. The award itself is a wooden plaque featuring a small brass hoofprint, and a tiny bell attached with a note. For ceremonial ringing only. Or very impressive toads. Margaret calls an impromptu town gathering to share the news. Everyone brings something: pies, poems, a ukulele. Eliza prepares a dramatic reading of the letter, complete with pauses and exaggerated gasps. Someone else brings a pot of cider and forgets the ladle, so it's dispensed using a hollow gourd. The mood is celebratory, but gentle. There are no streamers, no loud speeches. Just soft congratulations and someone strumming the 3 chords they know over and over with complete commitment. Smudge is given the plaque, which he proceeds to sniff, nudge, and then ignore. It's placed on the wall of the mayor's office anyway, just above his favorite napping corner. Later, someone sketches the scene in watercolor, Margaret holding the plaque, Smudge chewing calmly beside a window, and a banner overhead that reads, "Sometimes governance just needs a nap." The painting goes up in the bakery. And of course, the bakery responds the only way it knows how, with a new pastry. They call it Smudge's Commendation, a hoof-shaped shortbread with a surprise middle of plum jam. It's oddly popular. Back in the office, Margaret updates the town records. Her handwriting is neat and sleepy, the kind that curls slightly at the edges. Received Civic Award. Mayor remained unmoved, but the plaque is nice. Community spirits, high but not disruptive. Recommend more jam-based pastries for morale. You read it over her shoulder and smile. Because somehow, without grand designs or long manifestos, this Mule, and this town, have built something enduring. Not because they meant to, but because they listened, laughed, took turns, and every now and then, sat still long enough to hear themselves think. You don't remember exactly when the phrase smudge-style diplomacy entered everyday use, but it starts turning up more and more, on posters, in council notes, even whispered like a spell between friends who've just settled a disagreement over whose turn it is to refill the biscuit tin. It refers, loosely, to any resolution reached without argument, haste, or anyone raising their voice above the gentle murmur of a thoughtful teapot. Its core tenets? Sit. Listen. Choose slowly. Blink twice if you agree. Of course, it wasn't meant to leave town. But then came the delegation from East Cloverly. They were on the brink of a minor crisis. Nothing dramatic, just a long-standing disagreement over the location of their new community bench. One faction believed it should face the Willow Grove, for maximum contemplation. The other wanted it by the pond, for more duck visibility. Naturally, they'd heard about your Mule mayor. And they arrived not with arguments, but with sketchbooks, jam preserves, and an open mind. Margaret, sensing another chance to share the method, invites them to observe the circle of consensus. They are skeptical at first. They whisper. They watch. They write down things like mayor seems disinterested, possibly chewing on strategic goals. And yet, after an hour sitting in the soft arc of folding chairs, sipping tea with strangers and watching Smudge twitch his ears in what one visitor calls symbolic neutrality, they begin to smile. The willow versus pond issue is discussed, gently. Someone suggests a rotating bench. Someone else proposes 2 half benches that meet in the middle like a hug. Someone draws this idea in biscuit crumbs on the grass. The visiting delegation nods, impressed. One even pats Smudge's flank reverently, whispering, "You've changed the game, sir." Before they leave, they ask if they can send more townsfolk to observe. Margaret agrees, but insists any guests must follow the dress code. There's a dress code? The Cloverly delegate asks. Yes, Margaret says. Comfy layers. Gentle colors. And absolutely no shoes that make angry noises. The next few weeks see a quiet influx of visitors. Not tourists. Margaret would never allow that. This is a town, not an exhibit, she says. But students of peace, scholars of slowness, and the occasionally bewildered mayor of somewhere larger begin to arrive. Each one is welcomed the same way, with a seat in the circle, a cup of whatever's warm, and the steady presence of a mule who has, as Margaret puts it, mastered the art of not rushing to judgment, mostly because he's still chewing. Smudge, for his part, takes it all in stride. He naps. He sniffs coat buttons. He once accidentally stepped on a scroll someone was reading aloud, but this was interpreted as a sign of divine civic timing and later published as a pamphlet. Someone knits him a scarf. Another paints his portrait on a tea towel. A group from Pine Hollow composes a folk song in his honor called Blink Once for I. Historians still argue whether this constituted the first genuine political movement inspired by livestock. Some prefer to call it a governance-adjacent lifestyle trend. Others simply refer to it, endearingly, as the Smudge way. It's not just councils and delegations either. Artists begin sending in sketches of what they imagine equine leadership might look like. Some draw Smudge with a monocle. Others depict him holding a scroll labeled Peace by Pacing. Someone even sends in a tiny crown. It's politely declined. Margaret puts it on the shelf labeled Offerings, Misunderstandings, and Sweet Gestures. It's next to the embroidered handkerchief that reads All Hail the Mule King. You ask her one day if she ever imagined this little civic experiment going so far. She sips her tea and shrugs. Honestly, I thought the whole thing would collapse the moment someone asked Smudge to make a budget. But he never did. No. And oddly enough, we ended up with one anyway. Indeed, budget meetings have become another favorite activity at the circle. People bring their suggestions like baked goods, fresh, a little uneven, and made with care. A young woman proposes a library expansion. A retired sailor wants a sundial on every corner, for morale, not accuracy. A boy suggests investing in better seating for the annual toad counting contest. Some ideas are implemented. Some are lovingly placed in the later pile. A few, like the proposal for a town-wide kazoo alarm system, are redirected into more creative pursuits. The important thing is, Everyone is heard. And Smudge? He listens the only way he knows how, by being there. Constant. Centered. Just there. His presence has become more than symbolic. It's structural. Foundational. Like a particularly serene pillar that the whole house leans on without realizing it. One day, without planning, someone carves a small plaque for the bench nearest the mayor's favorite napping spot. It reads, "In the presence of calm, let us remember we can choose it too." The town begins calling it the Smudge bench. Newcomers often sit there first, unsure what to expect. They come with questions, frowns, furrowed brows. Some bring checklists. Some bring charts. But within minutes, maybe an hour, they're just quieter. More than once, you've seen a stranger sit down on that bench, look at the snoozing Neil a few yards away, and sigh as if they'd finally exhaled a sentence they didn't realize they'd been holding. And still, no words from the mayor. No declarations. No slogans. Just that unwavering commitment to stillness. To presence. To the quiet sort of leadership that says, "You've got this. I'm just here to help you believe it." One afternoon, you find Margaret standing next to the bench, gazing out over the square. Children are drawing chalk outlines of imaginary town expansions. Someone plays a soft tune on a handmade flute that mostly wheezes. Smudge dozes, front legs folded like a very polite camel. "It's funny," she says, "how much people want to be told what to do. Until they don't." She taps her pen against her clipboard. And then they just want to be reminded that they can figure it out. You nod. Because in this strange, stubborn, peaceful little place they have. And they will. One slow hoof step at a time. The days grow cooler. There's that telltale crispness in the air that smells faintly of apples, dry leaves, and the distant memory of summer laundry. Scarves appear in layers. The bakery starts adding cinnamon to things that never asked for it. And the mayor, ever punctual, begins choosing the sunny patches of grass more deliberately for his naps. It's autumn in the town of Smudge, and things are, as always, gently in motion. But this season, a new idea begins to waft through the community like steam off a morning mug, a civic festival. Not a celebration of Smudge, per se. He would surely disapprove of that much attention, but rather a celebration of everything that's sprung up around him. A gathering of ideas, guests, traditions, and baked goods too peculiar to sell anywhere else. Margaret calls it the Gentle Governance Festival. Doris, reading the name aloud, raises one eyebrow and says, "Bit wordy?" But I like the tone. Planning begins at the circle of consensus, of course. The topic is introduced with a polite throat clearing and a muffin, which is how most official business starts these days. Immediately, there are ideas. Let's build a maze out of bylaws nobody enforces. What if we host a three-legged debate? Smudge-themed bingo? Can we have a nap tent? We should invite all the other animal mayors. That's diplomacy. That last suggestion earns murmurs of approval and one triumphant kazoo note from Eliza, who's already working on the parade float sketches. The festival takes shape slowly, like a town Nero painted in polite layers. There will be tea tastings, slow races, for people and animals, an exhibit on misunderstood ordinances, and a crafts tent where residents can paint their favorite town moments on tiles shaped like hooves. And at the heart of it all, Smudge's Rest Pavilion. It's not a stage. There's no microphone. Just a shady structure with hay, flowers, and a sign that reads, "The mayor is present. Please don't wake him." Margaret coordinates logistics with the effortless grace of a well-oiled clipboard. She drafts volunteers, maps out booth placements with chalk on the town square, and ensures that the oat supply is double-stocked. Smudge, naturally, is consulted at each step. His feedback, usually expressed as either walks away or stands and blinks, is interpreted with surprising consistency. Eliza designs the festival banner. It's 80 feet long and features Smudge's face drawn in watercolor, surrounded by spirals of peaceful-looking snails. When asked why, she simply says, "Vibe synergy." Meanwhile, visitors begin arriving in trickles. The delegation from Tatterbrook returns, bearing pickled squash and a dance involving cloaks. East Cloverley sends Philippa the goose, who's reportedly taken to wearing a small medal and directing pedestrian traffic at home. Little Duckford's goat Mayor, Mr. Buttons, arrives in a wagon lined with velvet, looking vaguely over it. Margaret greets them all with her usual calm, her clipboard adorned with a single sticker. I break for thoughtful silences. You're assigned to help with the Ideas Lounge, a quiet corner where festival-goers are encouraged to write down their favorite peaceful resolutions on slips of paper and pin them to a giant felt mule. Some of the entries include: we agreed to disagree, then baked cookies. I decided not to win the argument. We flipped a spoon. Both sides were fine. I took a nap and forgot why I was mad. We let the mule choose. He wandered to the pie table. So did we. The festival is a quiet success. Not booming or crowded. Just enough people, just enough smiles, just enough shared blankets and confused but happy dogs. There's music, mostly of the softly strummed, vaguely out-of-tune variety. A poetry reading features verses about snail mail, gentle mayors, and a love song titled Your Voice is Like Civic Harmony. And then there's the parade. It's the slowest parade anyone's ever seen. It starts late, meanders mid-route, and includes a 15-minute pause so that Smudge can examine a particularly interesting tuft of grass. The crowd cheers softly. Someone hands out herbal lemonade. Children walk in a line holding signs that read things like, "Progress at a mule's pace." "We stand for standing still." "Policies with pause." He may be chewing, but he's listening. When the parade finally loops back to the square, Smudge is greeted with scattered applause, a fresh daisy crown, and a surprisingly solemn toast delivered by Harold. To the kind of leadership that lets the world catch its breath. Margaret later records this as most successful parade delay to date. By evening, the festival gently winds down. Lamps are lit. People recline on picnic blankets. The mayor dozes beside the pavilion, flanked by small baskets of donated fruit and a crochet project someone started but didn't finish because they were too relaxed. Eliza leads the final moment, a town-wide hum. It begins low, wobbly, uncertain, but grows into something quietly powerful. A sound not of triumph or demand, but of shared space. A harmony stitched together from naps and notes, from decisions made in the presence of grass, from days spent sitting quietly next to something steady. Smudge, of course, sleeps through it all. But when the humming ends, and the town sighs in unison, he stirs just enough to blink once at the stars. It's hard not to feel like that blink meant something. Later, Margaret will write, "First gentle governance festival concluded. Dignitaries peaceful. Goose well behaved. Mayoral engagement level, restful yet radiant. Recommendation, repeat annually, if only for the lemonade." You roll up your blanket, help stack a few chairs, and glance back at the square one last time. The lanterns sway in the night breeze. The tiles painted by residents catch the glow in soft colors. And at the center of it all, one unmoved, unbothered mayor keeps the quiet, steady watch of someone who trusts everyone to do just fine without him. And they do. They really do. The morning after the festival, the town is quiet, but not in that tired, post-celebration sort of way. It's the satisfying kind of silence you get after finishing a book you didn't expect to love, or finding a warm sock exactly when you needed it. You take a slow walk through the square. There are paper lanterns still bobbing gently from the night before, bits of ribbon clinging to benches like sleepy party guests who never left, and a distinct smell of apples, dust, and maybe cinnamon glue. A small chalkboard near the bakery reads, "Day after festival, stretch, sweep, repeat." Smudge is already awake, standing in the sun like a four-legged monument to recovery. He's chewing slowly on a leftover garland someone looped over a fence. It's unclear if it's edible, but he seems unfazed. Margaret appears next to you, holding a broom that's too short for her height and a clipboard that, by contrast, seems even more authoritative than usual. She smiles the smile of someone who didn't sleep much but didn't mind. "Well," she says, "no injuries, no brawls, no goats in the fountain. That's what we call a success." You nod. One of the ducks looked mildly offended during the kazoo portion. "Yes," she agrees. But that's just Kevin. He always looks like that. Cleanup begins the way most things do in town, with an informal roll call, a few well-placed muffins, and the shared understanding that nobody's actually in charge, but somehow everything still gets done. Eliza scrubs chalk messages off the sidewalk. Someone else collects the tile art from the crafts tent and gently wraps them in straw for the eventual wall of mostly reasonable thoughts installation. Doris organizes the leftover jam jars into flavor categories: sweet, confusing, and possibly medicinal. Meanwhile, a small group gathers in front of the mayor's office. They're not part of the cleanup crew. They're just lingering. A few familiar faces from nearby towns. A couple of festival-goers who decided to stay an extra day. A pair of travel writers who accidentally arrived 2 days late but were politely handed cider and told to soak in the ambience anyway. One of them, a quiet woman with thick glasses and a notebook full of crooked sketches, asks the question that's been circling in everyone's heads. Is this normal here? Margaret, overhearing, chuckles softly. Define normal. The woman thinks for a moment. I mean, is it always this peaceful? This kind? Margaret's smile softens. Not always. We get grumbly. We lose things. We argue about lamppost spacing. But we try to start from gentleness. And we've got a mayor who never interrupts. That gets a laugh, and Smudge, as if on cue, snorts and shifts weight from one hoof to another. The woman scribbles something down and adds, Has anyone tried doing this elsewhere? I mean, really doing it? Margaret's eyes narrow in mock suspicion. Are you planning a coup by Mule in your hometown? No. More like a garden version. A test patch. Like a little pilot of, what is it you all do? Margaret gestures around with her clipboard. We sit in circles. We breathe before answering. We bring extra snacks. We assume the best and brace for naps. The woman smiles. That sounds impossible in most places. Exactly why it works. Later that afternoon, she and the others leave town, but not before each of them stops by the bench near Smudge's favorite napping spot and touches the small plaque, as if hoping some of its quiet might rub off. By evening, the town feels lighter, as though it sighed and stretched and decided to remain just a bit more itself. You and a few others help fold the final chairs, sweep away the last trail of confetti from the impromptu slow dance near the well, and notice a few chalk messages left behind. Stay cozy, govern slowly. Smudge 2024, just kidding, please don't tell him. This town gave me ideas. Also, cookies. Still don't know what happened. 10 out of 10. And then you spot one in smaller, shakier handwriting, clearly a child's. He didn't talk. But I heard him anyway. You stop and just look at that one for a while. Because yes. Exactly that. The next morning, things are back to what passes for normal here. Eliza's adjusting a scarecrow to make it less smug-looking. Doris is experimenting with lavender in the gingerbread. It smells like soap, someone whispers, but in a good way. Harold is repairing the roof on the small gazebo he swears once hosted a raccoon-led town meeting, though no one can confirm it. And Smudge? He's resting. His legs are tucked. His ears twitch. His breath is slow, like the tide that never quite leaves. Someone's placed a small knitted blanket over his back. There's a note attached. Thank you for letting us learn in your quiet. No one claims to have written it. No one takes it down. And Margaret, as always, records it in her day's log. Post-festival atmosphere, settled and soft. Mayor continues to serve as unintentional anchor of emotional equilibrium. Recommendation: extend blanket policy through winter. That night you pass by the square just as the lanterns flicker on. A cat curls beside a flower pot. Somewhere in the distance, someone's singing, not loud, not polished. Just enough to carry. You take a seat on the bench. Smudge lifts his head briefly, blinks once, and lowers it again. You do the same. Because sometimes, words are unnecessary. Sometimes, leadership looks like stillness. And sometimes, the best kind of governance is the one that holds space for everyone to breathe. Autumn continues its gentle descent over the town, like a particularly thoughtful quilt being tucked around a drowsy guest. The leaves shift into their finest oranges and reds, rustling like polite applause for the trees that grew them. And all the while, Smudge remains an immovable constant, a four-hoofed metronome ticking out the rhythm of life at the town's preferred pace, somewhere between slow and still considering it. With the festival wrapped and most of the decorations neatly stored in Doris's barn, labeled by occasion and snack residue, the townspeople find themselves returning to their routines, but with a noticeable shift. It's hard to explain exactly what's changed. The bakery hasn't suddenly reinvented its croissants. The lampposts are still spaced unevenly enough to cause polite debates. But conversations are a little warmer. Pauses are more welcome. And there's a noticeable increase in communal humming, particularly near the well. Margaret calls it the afterglow of functional cooperation. You call it pretty nice. One morning, as the fog curls along the cobbled streets like a curious cat, Eliza bursts into the circle of consensus meeting with news so exciting she forgets to sit first. A pigeon brought a scroll. Now, that's not necessarily thrilling in most places, but here, mail by pigeon usually means either a civic emergency or a recipe swap gone very wrong. Margaret gently sets down her tea and says, "Go on." Eliza holds up the scroll like it's a treasure map. "It's from Windowbridge," she announces. "They've started their own circle. Not with a mule, though. They've elected a parrot." This earns some murmurs and one audibly skeptical grunt. Margaret nods. A parrot could work. Vocal, opinionated, excellent at repeating things. Eliza continues, "They've requested a visit. Want to compare methods. Also, they're sending muffins. Tropical themed. The decision is unanimous. A delegation will go. Smudge, of course, will not be traveling. He's made it clear, in the firmest way possible, by refusing to step beyond the third cobblestone past the bakery, that he is a local figure." Margaret begins assembling a team. Doris volunteers, mostly for muffin-related research. Eliza is in, provided she can wear her Diplomat of the Snail Kingdom sash. You're recruited, too, along with a carpenter named Wes who has a gift for interpreting vague gestures, which might come in handy with parrot-based governance. Before departure, Margaret crafts a modest but deeply thoughtful care package for Windowbridge. One copy of "So You've Elected a Livestock Mayor," annotated for parrots. A jar of Doris's award ambiguous fig jam. A hoofprint postcard signed with respect, Smudge. A hand-knit tea cozy shaped like a consensus circle. One very small umbrella labeled for symbolic shade only. The journey to Windowbridge takes a day and a half, 2 jam stops, and one accidental detour through a pumpkin field that was, in the end, worth it for the pie. Windowbridge is perched on the edge of a lake so calm it looks painted. The town square smells like citrus and old books. And in the center, on a carved wooden perch with a tiny nameplate, sits their mayor, Admiral Pickle. The parrot is bright green with a stare that could cut glass and a vocabulary that includes order, please, biscuits denied, and squeakonomic reform. Their circle of consensus, it turns out, is less nap-oriented and more performance-driven. The parrot often interrupts with dramatic flair, but the townspeople interpret this as part of the process. Your delegation observes, participates, and quietly swaps tips over lime scones. Turns out, the two towns aren't so different. They both believe in listening, in the value of gathering, in leaders who don't dominate the room, but rather hold it open for others. Before leaving, you exchange gifts. Admiral Pickle receives a travel-sized perch embroidered with "Peace is a perch we all can share." The Windowbridge Council gives you a banner with the parrot's likeness, and the phrase, "May your circles be ever unbroken." Back home, Smudge receives the banner with his usual grace. He glances at it, snorts, and rolls over in the grass. You take that as approval. That week, a new sign is added to the town's entry gate. It's hand-carved, slightly crooked, and absolutely sincere. Twinned with Windowbridge, home of parrot-based civility. Some folks raise eyebrows at the phrasing. Others ask if the parrot will be visiting. Eliza responds, "Not until we reinforce the gazebo." A few days later, you overhear Margaret muttering ideas for future crosstown initiatives. She mentions something about ambassador animals and regional nap summits. You nod because honestly, those sound promising. And Smudge? He just keeps showing up. Every day, he claims his spot in the courtyard. Every day, he watches, or doesn't, and lets the town do what it does best, figure things out together, one quietly strange step at a time. One evening, as dusk folds over the rooftops like a lazy scarf, someone brings a guitar to the square. They start to strum a few hesitant chords. Then a voice joins in. Then another. No one announces it. No one conducts. The music just happens. Soft harmonies. Laughter between verses. Feet tapping against cobbles. And in the center of it all, the mayor, still, listening, serene. By the time the last note fades, you realize no one's really talking anymore. They're just together. That's the thing about this town. It doesn't shout to be heard. It doesn't march to be seen. It doesn't declare itself onto the world stage. It just lives, deeply, kindly, stubbornly. And somehow, that's enough to make ripples. Like a mule's breast stirring grass, long after he's walked on. By the time the first frost dusts the town rooftops like powdered sugar, Smudge has officially claimed a new favorite nap location, just under the library's east-facing windows, where the morning light rolls in like warm syrup and occasionally, if he's lucky, someone reading aloud will drop a bit of biscuit from the sill. The townsfolk, recognizing the strategic brilliance of this move, install a small straw mat beneath the window. Someone embroiders a corner with the words, "Official Office Extension, Quiet Naps, Quiet Thoughts." It's around this time that the idea of a town archive begins to swirl through the air like chimney smoke. It starts, naturally, with Margaret. She's flipping through her daily records, each one written in looping, sleepy script, and realizes that what began as harmless meeting notes has somehow become a full chronicle of the Smudge era. Dozens of pages, each one capturing the town's civic quirks, decisions, and gentle missteps. She presents the idea to the circle the next day, an archive. A place to store the stories, drawings, misinterpreted bylaws, and community-sourced solutions that have defined the past year. Doris, without blinking, says we'll need a cozy room with lots of chairs and no pressure to read in order. The motion passes unanimously. The location? A disused broom closet in the back of the library, about the size of a modest pantry and previously home to 3 forgotten umbrellas and a poster for a puppet show no one remembers attending. Eliza is tasked with design, which she approaches with the fervor of someone redecorating a royal reading nook. She paints the inside with spirals and soft clouds, lines the shelves with fabric scraps, and installs a lantern that glows just dimly enough to encourage thoughtful sighs. A hand-painted sign is hung above the doorway. The Archive of Gentle Progress, also featuring snacks. Within days, contributions begin to roll in. Margaret donates her meeting notes, categorized by intent, outcome, and eventually sorted itself out. Doris provides recipe cards annotated with civic reflections, e.g., "This jam worked well for consensus. Try with scones during sensitive topics." Children contribute drawings of Smudge wearing various hats labeled Mayor Mood No. 1 through No. 17. Someone leaves a folded paper crane with the words "Forgiveness for the Lantern Mix-Up" inked on one wing. The archive becomes something more than a collection. It becomes a conversation, slow and ongoing. Visitors come not just to read, but to sit, to remember, to add. One afternoon, you find a young girl reading a letter out loud to Smudge, who's lying just outside the doorway. It reads, "Dear future me, you were worried about the garden, but it rained the next day. Maybe don't worry so hard. Love past you." Smudge blinks once and flicks his ear. It's basically a standing ovation. Margaret adds a section to the archive titled Correspondence with Time. It encourages residents to write to future versions of themselves, gentle reminders, kind advice, apologies that no longer require delivery. Soon, a little postbox appears next to the entry. Labeled Letters to Later, it fills up slowly, week by week. Here's the thing nobody quite planned for: the archive, with its sleepy lighting and quiet pages, becomes a place of decision-making too. Not the big kind. Not the kind that needs a circle or a mule's watchful gaze. But the soft decisions. Should I try again? Was that apology enough? Is it okay if I still don't know? And somehow, reading about how Doris once called an emergency session to debate the emotional temperature of her jam, or how Margaret accidentally scheduled 2 events for the same Tuesday and solved it with muffins, those stories become a bomb. Historians still argue whether this counts as formal governance. Some say it's just cozy clutter. Others insist it represents a new genre, restorative documentation through passive reflection and jam. One scholar proposed calling it muleocratic memory, though that never caught on. Meanwhile, in the library's side room, people continue to arrive. Sometimes in pairs, sometimes alone. Sometimes they read. Sometimes they just sit. Sometimes, they reach into the archive's tactile section, which includes a blanket shaped like a compromise, a rock painted with the phrase "We're still here," and a stuffed version of Smudge with a Velcro brow for changing expressions. Eliza insists the archive needs an expansion. There's too much calm, she says. It's overflowing. Margaret gently reminds her that calm cannot, in fact, overflow, but agrees to add a second chair. By winter, the room smells faintly of paper, lemon biscuits, and whatever wood polish Harold insists smells like wisdom. Visitors keep arriving, now from farther afield, neighboring villages, curious writers, even a traveling weaver who heard that there's a place where towns breathe like animals and nobody yells. One day, a guest leaves behind a short poem. I came expecting nothing. I found quiet in a basket. The mayor never looked up. But somehow I left heard. No name. No date. Margaret frames it anyway. And Smudge? Still present. Still napping near the east wall. Still reminding everyone, by simply being, that motion is not the only measure of progress. That sometimes stillness writes the most lasting kind of history. The first snowfall arrives with all the pomp of a slow yawn, soft, sprawling, and thoroughly unconcerned with punctuality. Flakes drift down like sugar sifted through a sieve, settling on rooftops, fences, and the long, velvety nose of the town's mayor, who doesn't bother to move. He merely snorts once, rearranges his hooves, and lets the snow decorate him like a particularly patient statue. Winter, it seems, is here. The town shifts accordingly. Scarves multiply. The bakery doubles its cinnamon output. And Margaret updates the official meeting guidelines to include mandatory mitten etiquette. That is, please don't gesture too wildly unless your mittens are of the soft and friendly variety. Inside the circle of consensus, blankets appear on laps. Tea consumption increases. One person proposes that decisions should only be made by candlelight from now on for ambience, and while no one fully commits, the idea is tabled for consideration, by which they mean they placed a small candle on the suggestion table. Meanwhile, Smudge takes on an even more pronounced role as a sort of emotional thermometer. If he's upright and blinking, the day is full of promise. If he's lying down but chewing, mild complications, but manageable. If he's entirely prone, facing away from the square, proceed gently, and maybe bring muffins. The town has long accepted this as both reliable and strangely accurate. Still, with winter's quiet comes introspection. One afternoon, as the wind curls through the shutters and the lampposts wear little knitted sleeves, Margaret proposes a new initiative. We've got an archive, she says, setting down her clipboard. A mayor. A festival. Even a banner diplomacy program. She pauses. But we've never officially asked ourselves the most important question. Everyone leans forward. What is it, she continues, that this town believes in? At first, there's silence. Then Doris says, jam. Someone else offers, restorative biscuits. Eliza adds, snail-based metaphor alignment. All valid. All gently noted. But Margaret presses further. I mean our values. The things we carry. The things we teach, without realizing it. It's a big idea. The kind that might require 2 rounds of tea and at least 1 knitted flowchart. So they don't rush it. Instead, they start gathering answers the slow way, one thought at a time. Every home is given a small, blank scroll labeled beliefs we've lived by. Residents are encouraged to fill it with anything they feel reflects the spirit of the town. Some scrolls return almost empty, with just a sentence or two. We always offer a chair. We never clap before the mayor's awake. It's okay to need longer to decide. Silence isn't disinterest. Sometimes it's just listening. Everyone should get a second cinnamon bun, even Kevin the duck. Others are filled edge to edge, crammed with thoughts, drawings, tiny maps of where certain feelings happened. Like here is where I realized I wasn't afraid of being wrong anymore. Margaret compiles them, sorts them by tone, and eventually arranges them into a set of 10 simple precepts. She calls them the Smudge Principles, a civic approach to gentle belonging. They are, in no particular order. Listen longer than is comfortable. Assume everyone has a story they haven't told yet. Make space, physically, emotionally, metaphorically. Chew before deciding. Literally and otherwise. Let silence work. It's smarter than you think. Say yes when it's soft. Say no when it's kind. Celebrate gently, but often. Share warmth, blankets, ideas, tea. Mistakes are part of town growth. Like moss on a wall. If in doubt, nap on it. They're posted on the town notice board, not with fanfare, but with thumbtacks and a note that reads, "Edit if you need." We're always becoming. Surprisingly, or perhaps not, no one changes them. One chilly morning, as the snow hangs in the air like suspended thought, a visitor arrives. She's wrapped in layers, carrying a case that looks suspiciously like it contains either a violin or the world's most well-insulated baguette. Turns out, she's from a distant place called Belmere, a city known for bustling. Her mayor is a very tall man named Percy who uses words like synergy and wears a vest with extra pockets for authority. She's come as an emissary, curious about this whole Mule-based municipal structure. Margaret welcomes her with a steaming cup of something involving cloves and patience. Then she's led to the Smudge bench. Smudge, true to form, is chewing. The visitor, initially hesitant, eventually relaxes. She sets down her clipboard, removes her extra puffed coat, pulls out a small notepad labeled Field Observations, Tranquil Governance Models. She watches. She listens. She waits. And in that waiting, something shifts. Later that evening, during a shared meal involving 9 kinds of bread and 1 mystery stew, mildly alarming, but growing on me, says Doris, the visitor says something unexpected. I think we've been shouting solutions at problems that just wanted to be invited to sit. Eliza lifts her mug. To quiet her thinking. The visitor toasts with her. To the mule who didn't need to fix, just to be. Before she leaves, she requests a copy of the Smudge Principles. Margaret hands her a scroll, freshly written in purple ink. You'll want to let the ink dry, she adds. That last principle tends to smudge. There are groans. Soft ones. And then laughter, the gentle kind that warms noses and loosens shoulders. As the visitor disappears into the snowy path, a trail of hoofprints follows her for a few yards, Smudge's, unmistakably. He doesn't go far. Just far enough to say, "We saw you. You mattered. Travel well." Then he returns to his mat beneath the library window, where, with the sun dipping low, and the wind humming old lullabies, he blinks twice. A signal of sorts. Or maybe just a mule enjoying the view. Either way, the town breathes a little deeper that night. Because knowing what you believe doesn't always require a speech. Sometimes, it just requires staying still long enough to notice the way your own heart softens. As winter deepens, the town settles further into its quiet rhythm. Snow piles gently against stone walls and windowsills, and the square becomes a maze of boot prints, wagon ruts, and the occasional suspiciously hoof-shaped depression. Smudge has taken to dragging his tail through fresh powder like a calligrapher with no deadlines, unintentionally creating slow, looping trails that children now call the mule's maze. No one rushes to clear the snow. Instead, they adapt. The circle of consensus relocates temporarily to Doris's barn, which is surprisingly cozy once you get past the faint smell of pickled turnip. Long planks become benches, hay bales are repurposed as ottomans, and an old sled is used to ferry in the communal tea kettle, which now requires 2 people to pour safely. Smudge, naturally, is given a reserved spot near the back, where a sunbeam sneaks in through a crooked board and bathes him in just enough light to nap heroically. It's in this cozy winter huddle that Margaret introduces her next idea. We've shared stories, she says, warming her hands on a mismatched mug. We've written scrolls, held festivals, even defined our beliefs. But I think it's time we put something into the world. Someone raises an eyebrow. Like a product? More like a message, Margaret says. Something to send outward. Not to promote or advertise, but to offer. A gift, from us to anyone who's listening. Doris nods slowly. Like jam diplomacy, but with fewer lids. They brainstorm. What kind of message best captures the spirit of a town led by a nonverbal mule and governed by tea, trust, and an unshakable commitment to mildness? The answer, it turns out, is a pamphlet. Eliza volunteers to design it. It should fold into a triangle, she insists. Triangles feel stable. The name? In case you ever forget, a pamphlet of peaceful reminders from the town that elected a mule. The contents are modest, heartfelt, and a little odd. Exactly as intended. Page 1, a note from Smudge. Blank, of course, save for a delicate hoofprint and the words "your presence is enough." Page 2, a list of things that have helped residents on difficult days. Warm bread, even if slightly burnt. Walking backwards to see things differently. Listening to wind without trying to describe it. Wearing 2 scarves just because. Letting someone else go first, especially in conversation. Page 3, a gentle set of reassurances. You don't need to have the right answer to ask a good question. Pausing isn't quitting. It's okay if you still need quiet. You are not late. You are just arriving now. Page 4, a short poem found scribbled on the back of a sugar packet last year. If you're lost, blink twice. If you're unsure, sit down. If the day feels too loud. Remember, the mayor doesn't speak. But he's never misunderstood. Page 5, a drawing of Smudge in profile, standing beneath the town's single lamppost, with this caption. He leads us not by walking ahead, but by being where we are. The final page is blank, intentionally, with a note. Write what you need to remember. Or just let the space be quiet. They print 50 copies on thick, comforting paper that smells faintly of lavender and library dust. Each one is folded by hand, tucked into a hand-sewn envelope, and sent off with the town's winter delivery mule. Not Smudge, of course, but his distant cousin, Muffin, who is slightly faster and extremely proud of his travel scarf. The pamphlets go out to neighboring villages, curious strangers who once visited the archive, and even to a newspaper columnist who wrote, semi-mockingly, "Sure, let the mule lead. What's the worst that could happen?" He receives his copy in an envelope labeled "What if it's the best?" and is later reported to have hung it above his writing desk. Weeks pass. Winter deepens. Snow piles become sculptures. Harold accidentally creates a very convincing likeness of Admiral Pickle, the parrot mayor, out of frozen laundry. The bakery introduces something called a thought bun, which is just a normal roll filled with warm silence. It sells out daily. And slowly, responses begin to arrive. Letters. Notes. Poems written in corners. A napkin sketch of a bench with room for one more. A child's drawing of a mule with a crown made entirely of patience. Some write to thank Smudge directly. Others admit they didn't quite understand the pamphlet, but liked the way it smelled. One person, anonymous, simply returns the final page, now filled with this. I remembered I don't have to be loud to be loved. The circle reads every message. Eliza strings them into a mobile that hangs in the barn, spinning gently whenever someone sighs too close to it. And in the center of the barn, just beneath the soft hum of shared silence, Smudge sleeps. He doesn't know he started a movement. He doesn't know about the pamphlets, the poems, the mobile made of gratitude. He just breathes. Slow. Steady. Present. And in doing so, continues to remind the town, And now, the world, that gentle things are not weak things. That stillness can echo. That leadership can be quiet enough to hear footsteps beside it. Margaret writes in her journal that night. The pamphlet was never about teaching. It was about reminding. Reminding others that they already know how to be kind. How to wait. How to hold space without filling it. She closes her pen, sips her tea, and adds one more line. Smudge blinked twice today. I think he knows. And whether he does or not, the town will keep going. Not racing forward. Not shouting its message into the wind. Just walking steadily, with hooves pressed softly into snow, leaving behind a trail that says, here is where we were kind. Here is where we listened. Here is where we let a mule remind us to be human. By late January, the town has become a masterclass in cozy resistance to the outside world's chaos. Snowbanks line the streets like polite hedgerows. Conversations have slowed to the point where you can hear the pause between questions and answers, and the occasional thoughtful sip of tea in between. The mayor has not moved in 3 days. Well, that's not entirely true. He blinked twice yesterday and leaned, ever so slightly, into a sunbeam that wandered across the square. But otherwise, Smudge remains very much in what Margaret calls executive hibernate mode. And truthfully, no one minds. The town, after all, continues on, not because it must, but because it can. Today begins with a subtle moment of alarm. Doris runs out of jam labels. Which, in any other town, would be cause for an immediate and decisive action. But here, it leads to an impromptu community discussion held at the bakery over cinnamon muffins and hot cider. Possible solutions are raised. Eliza suggests a pictorial system of flavor-based emojis. Harold proposes scratch and sniff lids, which are met with cautious enthusiasm. Kevin the duck offers nothing but judgmental waddling. Margaret votes to let the jars speak for themselves in a moment of radical transparency. In the end, they settle on handwritten notes that simply read, best guess, delicious. Crisis averted. Barely. Afterward, someone notes that this meeting, while technically about jam, had all the elements of effective governance. Patience, muffins, a temporary descent into chaos, and eventual agreement through mutual shrugs. It's marked in the circle log as Jam Diplomacy, Winter Session. Later that week, a curious package arrives. It's addressed to Smudge and tied with twine made from what appears to be lavender-scented ribbon. Inside, a tiny medal, no bigger than a biscuit. The attached note reads, in recognition of steadfast nonverbal leadership and championing of civic serenity. Awarded by the Society for Unrushed Decision-Making. P.S. There's no ceremony. Just vibes. Eliza fastens the medal to Smudge's favorite scarf. He blinks once and goes back to sleep. The story spreads. Not through newspapers or broadcasts, but through letters. Through anecdotes shared across fence posts and along wintry footpaths. Through whispers and one particularly heartfelt limerick scrawled in chalk near the well. There once was a mule with no haste, whose policies never were based on yelling or tweets, but on naps and on treats. A mayor of marvel and taste. Soon, other towns begin writing in. One asks if they can borrow the 10 Smudge principles for a workshop on cooperative patience. Another inquires about the feasibility of electing a tortoise as their city comptroller. Margaret, ever the diplomat, responds warmly. The species isn't the point. The posture is. She begins drafting a document, a kind of guidebook, but more philosophical. She titles it Municipal Softness, a Framework for Feeling-Led Communities. It's part essay, part storybook, part illustrated manual featuring diagrams like how to read a meeting room's mood from one duck's body language, the ideal distance between chairs for honest conversation, when to pass the scone instead of the gavel. Margaret shares her drafts with the circle. Feedback is generous and curious. Needs more diagrams. Could we include a recipe for emotional resilience scones? The footnote about snails made me cry. Doris insists that all copies include a folded insert titled The Power of Pausing, Tips from a Mule, which, naturally, is blank. They print the guidebook in small batches, wrap each one in handwoven covers, and send them with notes like, "This isn't instruction. It's an invitation." Smudge continues his silent reign. By now, there's a kind of mythos to him. Newer residents wonder if he has powers. Children whisper that he once predicted a thunderstorm by sneezing on a Tuesday. Doris insists that he nodded meaningfully during the biscuit referendum last spring, which might have tipped the vote toward apricot. Historians still argue whether this myth-making diminishes or deepens his role. Some say it's projection. Others suggest it's what happens when people learn to find guidance in stillness. A scholar from a distant university sends a questionnaire titled, "Animal-Led Governance, a Study in Collective Myth and Municipal Projection." No one fills it out. Instead, someone knits the cover into a tea cozy. But what truly defines this season, what makes it different from any before, is the moment that comes quietly, one evening in February. A child, barely old enough to spell her own name but wise enough to understand tone, approaches the mayor while he's resting beneath the lamppost. She has a small question. Not a big one. Not something like "Why are we here?" or "What is justice?" But something small and real and terribly important in the way that small questions often are. She says, "Is it okay that I didn't say anything today?" Smudge doesn't move. He doesn't nod. Doesn't flick his tail. Doesn't blink. He just breathes. And in that long, even breath, something happens. The girl smiles, sits beside him, and says nothing more. Later, Margaret writes in her log, "The mayor responded to a civic concern with deep, wordless reassurance." It was enough. The town does not mark the moment with ceremony. No bell is rung. No speeches are made. But the next day, a sign appears beside Smudge's favorite bench. It reads, "Silence is sometimes the best kind of participation." And underneath, in smaller lettering, "Also, snacks help. Winter carries on. Snow melts a little. Lanterns are lit earlier. The bakery invents a new roll shaped like a question mark, and no one knows quite what's in it, but everyone agrees it's comforting." And Smudge, still present, still quiet, remains exactly where he needs to be, at the center of a town that remembers how to listen. The first signs of spring come not with dramatic flair, but with a series of tiny, polite nudges. A crocus nudges through the frost near the blacksmith's stoop. A pair of robins nudge the silence with tentative chirps. And the townspeople, nudged out of their heavy coats, begin to rediscover their elbows and outer shirt layers. Smudge, of course, remains unmoved by the season's overtures. He lies beneath his usual lamppost, though now it casts light on daffodils instead of snowdrifts. Someone has woven a floral crown for him. He does not object. One morning, Margaret steps into the circle of consensus meeting holding a scroll labeled simply, "Legacy Project?" She unrolls it onto the large circular table, revealing a loosely drawn map of the town. "It's time," she says, "to build something. Not just for us, but for whoever wanders through, wondering what we stood for." There's silence. Then Harold murmurs, "We stood for taking things slowly." Doris adds, "And for snacks." Eliza, with a mouthful of shortbread, suggests, "Maybe we build a museum?" Everyone turns toward her. "Well, not a real museum," she clarifies. "A gentle one. With no security guards or interactive screens that shout at you. Just quiet, and maybe a place to nap." The idea sticks. They won't call it a museum, though. That feels too heavy, too dusty. Instead, they agree to call it the Stillness Hall. A single-room structure, circular like the meetings, with arched windows to let in both light and silence. Not grand. Not imposing. Just open. Warm. Filled with moments rather than exhibits. Each resident offers to contribute. Eliza donates a painted tile from the festival of mostly reasonable music. On the back it says, "This one cracked, but I liked it better that way." Harold constructs a bench shaped like an apostrophe, explaining, "It's the pause between two important things." Margaret brings a framed quote from one of Smudge's rare documented moods. "Unbothered, unhurried, unapologetic." Doris bakes a biscuit that no one is allowed to eat. It's placed on a pedestal beneath a glass dome with a sign. Restraint. Exhibit A. The children contribute a series of small, wobbly sculptures titled Feelings the Mayor Has Probably Felt. A visiting weaver donates a tapestry stitched entirely in shades of quiet. When pressed for details, she explains, it's made of sheep wool, linen, and a little bit of hush. The hall's rules are as follows. No shoes louder than your thoughts. Whispers welcome, but not required. Nap zones clearly marked. Please don't wake anyone unless they become part of the exhibit. Do not attempt to summarize what you've seen. Smudge, as expected, does not attend the opening. Instead, he remains near the square, chewing contemplatively on a sprig of clover. He seems vaguely aware that something significant is happening, but also confident that whatever it is, it's probably fine. The hall becomes a destination, though never a crowded one. Visitors step inside and pause. Some sit. Some cry, softly and for no discernible reason. Some bring items of their own to add, a pebble with forgiveness carved into it, a faded map marked only with here, a letter that simply reads, I'm trying. Each item is accepted, catalogued gently, and placed wherever it feels right. One day, a girl who once visited months ago, who once asked Smudge if it was okay not to speak, returns with a small box. Inside, a single jigsaw piece with no matching set, wrapped in a note. I still don't know where I fit. But this felt honest. Margaret places it on a tiny shelf beneath a sign that says, to be continued. In time, the hall gains a second nickname among the townsfolk. The room where breathing gets easier. That spring, the town begins hosting wandering days. On these, there are no chores assigned, no meetings scheduled. People are encouraged to simply walk, visit old paths, notice things. To wander without purpose. It's not mandatory, of course, nothing ever is. But on these days, the square becomes quieter than usual. The benches fill. The archive of gentle progress sees more foot traffic. The air hums with contemplative aimlessness. Even Smudge participates, in his own way. He doesn't leave the square. But he shifts positions. Once he even stood up and walked a full 20 steps to a different patch of grass. Doris swears he winked. Historians still argue whether a mule's blink can be classified as intentional. Some insist it was just pollen. Others claim it was a moment of transcendent interspecies empathy. The circle doesn't debate it. Instead, they create a small bronze plaque near that patch of grass. It reads, Here, the mayor moved. Let that be enough. As the days stretch longer and the shadows shift with softer angles, you begin to realize something else has taken root in the town. Not a policy, not a principle, but a quiet confidence. The kind of assurance that grows not from being right, but from being together. From trusting stillness. From remembering that leadership can sometimes mean lying down first, so others know they're allowed to rest too. One evening, as the lanterns flicker and the bakery's windows glow like stories retold, Margaret calls for a short, impromptu gathering. No agenda. No big announcement. Just a shared moment. Everyone sits in a loose, lopsided circle. No one speaks. No one needs to. After a while, Eliza starts humming, not a song, exactly, but a sound that fits the space. Others join lightly. No rhythm. No harmony. Just presence. And in the center of it all, though he doesn't move, Smudge is there. Not leading. Just being. Which is, you realize, more than enough. The final days of spring approach like a softly exhaled sentence, neither urgent nor overstated, just complete in their quiet rhythm. The lilacs bloom with embarrassing enthusiasm, bees bumble like they've misplaced their to-do lists, and the grass in the town square rises just high enough to tickle the ankles of anyone moving too quickly. Which, frankly, is no one. Smudge, at this point, has become more than mayor. He is now a cultural fixture. A municipal mood board. A symbol stitched into the hems of jackets, painted on children's lunch tins, and once, accidentally, sculpted into mashed potatoes at the annual community potluck. This week, Margaret proposes a new kind of gathering, one not about planning or reviewing or resolving, but simply acknowledging. It's not a festival, she clarifies. It's not a tribute. It's just a sitting. Everyone seems to understand. They call it the long sit. No banners. No agenda. Just a time and a place. The town square, from sunrise to sunset, come and go as you please. When the day arrives, the town wakes gently. There are no trumpets, no bunting. Just the soft clatter of mugs, the polite creak of porch steps, and the faint, almost inaudible snort of Smudge rising from sleep. Margaret is the first to arrive, blanket in tow, thermos of spiced tea at her side. She settles near the base of the town's only tree, a pleasantly lopsided maple that's held more secrets than squirrels. Soon others follow. No one talks at first. There's the occasional nod, the whispered thud of a muffin being unwrapped. Smudge ambles over slowly, positioning himself just between sun and shade, as if to remind everyone that balance is a decision you can make with your hooves. Throughout the day, people come and go. Children bring chalk and trace messages along the cobblestones. Rest is revolutionary. We don't always need to fix it. Hi, Mayor Smudge. I brushed my hair today. Eliza knits without looking, her needles making a soft tick-tick like a slow heartbeat. Doris reads aloud from a mystery novel in a tone that suggests she already knows who did it but isn't telling. At noon, someone offers slices of lemon cake. No one asks who brought it. It simply appears, as kindness often does. And then comes the moment everyone will remember, not for its noise or its novelty, but for its perfect, breath-held stillness. A breeze. Just strong enough to rustle the leaves. And in that moment, the entire square leans back slightly, like a single, sighing exhale. Nothing is said. Nothing needs to be. Because this is what they've built. Not just a town, not just a system, not just a joke-turned tradition with hooves and hay and the soft snort of democracy, but a way. A way of being. A way of leading. A way of listening to the spaces between sentences. Margaret takes out her little notebook, flips to a blank page, and writes. We didn't need to vote today. We just needed to be. Evening tiptoes in. Lanterns are lit, one by one, their soft glow catching in teacups and windows and the glint of Smudge's half-closed eyes. Somewhere, a violin plays, not professionally, not perfectly, but with just enough wobble to feel human. People begin to rise. Fold blankets. Pat shoulders. There's no announcement that the long sit is over. It just ends the way all good things should, when everyone feels ready. Before leaving, each person takes a small pebble from a basket Margaret set out. No instructions. No requirement. Just an invitation to carry a moment home. Some keep theirs in pockets. Some plant them in gardens. One person paints theirs to look like a very smug slice of bread and gives it a name. Smudge, naturally, remains where he is. A quiet sentinel in a town that never needed him to be more than exactly himself. And then, as night wraps itself around the rooftops and the final lantern flickers beneath the lilac sky, something remarkable happens. Smudge stands. Not to leave. Not to eat. But to walk, slowly and deliberately, in a circle around the square. A full loop. No hurry. No fanfare. Just one full revolution, the way the sun had done overhead, the way stories do in hearts. He stops near the mural, now faded slightly with time but no less adored. He breathes. He blinks. And then, just once, he brays. Loud, deep, and unmistakably satisfied. You could hear a teacup clink a block away. And then someone, probably Harold, says softly, "Guess the mayor's closing remarks are in." The square chuckles. But it's not laughter at a joke. It's recognition. Affirmation. A town exhaling together. And slowly, gently, everyone returns home. Some humming. Some smiling. Some quietly realizing they'll never look at silence the same way again. So now, as your eyes grow heavier, and the world outside your window softens into its own slow rhythm, let yourself drift with the same calm that moved through that little square today. There's no need to carry decisions with you now. No need to organize or summarize or solve. The mayor has spoken, and not with orders, but with presence. And that presence, that steady stillness, lives here with you too. Maybe there's a quiet space inside you, a soft bench, a warm blanket, a patch of late afternoon sun. Maybe you've just taken your seat there now, warm drink in hand, no questions required. Breathe. Feel the weight of your day settle gently beside you, not pressing down, but simply saying, I'm here too. Let the stillness wrap around your shoulders like your favorite shawl. Let the hush between words stretch just a little longer. You're allowed this pause. You've earned it, not by doing, but by being. Soften your brow. Loosen your jaw. Let your hands rest, palms open. And as you begin to drift, let this final image carry you. A sleepy little town, lit by lanterns and laughter, where leadership naps beneath a tree, and wisdom walks with hooves through fresh grass. Where even silence is met with applause. And where, perhaps tonight, your dreams arrive not with answers, but with one slow blink and a bray.